Well, hi, I'm Edward Funk and Podcast 88, Loretta Young's Two Encounters with Marilyn Monroe. Now, but we'll start with some domestic uh, stuff first. Tom Lewis, Loretta's husband, bought property in Ojai, California for a vacation home. They already had equity in the Ojai Inn, which was next door. Tom had time on his hands, which allowed him to interaction with the children, Loretta reflected. Well, you'd think this would be healthy, but it wasn't. Whatever Christopher did, uh, I can remember Tom telling Pete, "No, Pete, your brother's right. He's your older brother and he knows best." Now, Paula was Loretta's next picture. It was produced by Columbia and directed by Rudy Mate, who Loretta greatly admired, even going back into his silent film days. If you ever see a French film about St. Joan of Arc, uh, that's Rudy Mate. She recalled, "The best scene in Paula is in the beginning where she's given birth to the baby and loses it. Rudy says, now, no makeup, just put a little oil on your skin." And he was right. It was absolutely beautiful and really and real looking. The bone structure and everything was marvelous. Now, this is me talking. I love how aware Loretta was of how she was photographed. She told me once that most actresses let their stand-ins stand in for the lighting test. Loretta did those herself, saying that it was her face they were photographing, and she wanted them to see the possible shadows and planes and know how to photograph it at its best. Now, Loretta met Couturier Jean-Louis while doing fittings for Paula. She recalled Harry Cohn, who's that Sue and Columbia, had stolen him from a top design house in New York, and that was Hattie Carnegie. He had great taste, not motion picture taste, but New York taste. I said, "I want to look very soft and feminine." "Oh," he said, "fine." And that's just the way I looked in that picture. He was very talented. Loretta and John Louis were destined to become great friends. Now, Paula was a little picture, filmed in black and white, with all the location shooting done in the Los Angeles area. It was able to turn a predictable profit. But profits were no longer as predictable in Hollywood as they'd been in the heady war years of the 40s. And the federal court mandate for studios to detach themselves from their own theater chains had really complicated the situation. Social mores were also in flux. Frank Capra's important films, uh, we're thinking of Mr. D Goes to Washington, It's a Wonderful Life, really feel good films like that. All of his films were behind him, all the good ones, and they were being replaced by a wave of post-war realism. The letter was a holdout from the golden area. The newer stars exuded a more blatant sexuality. Jane Russell, Jane Mansfield, Mindy Van Dorn, all would hit their stride in the 50s. No one epitomized the new sexuality better than a young girl coming on strong at 20th Century Fox, Marilyn Monroe. Loretta recalled the only two times she saw Marilyn Monroe. "I was over at the wardrobe department," this is Loretta speaking, "at 20th Century Fox, and I was coming out of a fitting room as Marilyn was coming in. David Levy, head of wardrobe, said, 'Oh, Loretta, I want you to meet a new actress we have on the lot. She's going to go very far.' And she said, 'Oh, how do you do?' Dave felt very sorry for her. I think all men did. This is Loretta again. "I had seen her once before with Johnny Hyde. Now, Johnny was an agent, 20 years older than me, who came up to about my shoulder. And here was this blonde hanging on to him as if he were Clark Gable. It was just so obvious. Uh, well, I'm going to diverge a little bit. Johnny left his wife, and he and Marilyn um, moved into a home in Palm Springs. And then Johnny had died of a heart attack. And of course, his family was not willing to let Marilyn come to the funeral. And she had a suicide attempt. I don't know if that was her first or not, but I know that she attempted suicide at that point. Okay. Now, back to Loretta. My impression of Marilyn are that she was a little misfit who looked voluptuous and I think in a way very beautiful. But she learned early on to use people because she had been used herself extraordinarily bad. And I guess she learned how to maneuver. Now, here's a note from me. I have read that Norbert Jean Baker, who became Marilyn Monroe, had been placed at 8 different foster homes. Then she was married off at age 15, so she didn't have to go into another foster home. Now back to Loretta. She was honored by Lux Radio Theater for making her 25th appearance on the program in the spring of 1951. She was the first and only movie star to achieve that record. Radio, too, was undergoing a transition and would share a common enemy with the motion picture industry, television. Advertising revenues were being diverted from radio to the new medium, and total picture revenue continued a steady decline from its apex of 1946. The cloud represented by television moved much larger over the movie business than all the other factors stirring up the industry. And the cloud would keep getting darker for another decade before the movie industry redefined its place in the new order. Movies would never again be the king of the mountain in terms of revenue generated and the power of influence. However, as television was just beginning, its future was far from clear. Many in Hollywood saw it as an upstart, distasteful at best, and vowed they'd never have a set in their homes. Now, Loretta was more of a realist and one of the first to own a television. She remembered the first evening after the set was installed. Tom and I and the kids were in the living room after dinner, and I had told the cook and the maid and the gardener and anybody else who was around come in so us could watch the suspenseful show. The boys were little. Now, there was a shot of a woman fully dressed walking into this room. She started to undress, the camera was on her face, and she pulled her slip over her head. Finally, she turned around, and 2 hands closed around her neck and choked her to death. Says Loretta, she's dead. Well, of course, the kids screamed, everybody screamed, because we're watching a murder right in our living room. Tom jumped up and turned the television off, and we talked about it all night. I was horrified. My first impulse was to ask, do I want this thing in my house if the kids are going to be scared to death by it? But then I thought, this is the medium for me to get into. If I have a show, I'll take up 1/2 hour, or at least I won't be scaring anybody to death. Tom's reaction was, you're leaving a lucrative business to go into something unknown. He had a point. I was leaving a career that was paying me over $200,000 for a picture. Loretta realized that she was at a juncture in her career. She had strived to be a movie star, and for many years had, and in her mind, she had reached that pinnacle when she won an Academy Award. She realized, I had made my goal, but I still wanted to become a better actress. I thought if I had an anthology series, that it would stimulate my imagination and stretch me. The idea of playing a different character each week excited me. Now, this is me talking. A brief explanation of an anthology series. The only constants were the host and the sponsor. In Loretta's case, she'd be a host, and then she would play a continuing character in the show itself. The shows could be drama, comedy, romance, suspense. And this was a format that had been very popular in radio. So people were familiar with it in the radio medium. Now, Loretta's agent at the William Morris Agency didn't share her enthusiasm. They pointed out that instead of making $20,000 a week while she was working, it'd be more like $1,500. But Loretta recalled, I finally said to my agent, Abe Glassvogel, I can't wait until there's enough money because I'll be too old to do what I want to do. It would take Loretta 2 years to talk him into making a deal. Now, word got around that Loretta had set her sights on television, and to many, it seemed like a betrayal. Recall Loretta. Both L.B. Mayer and David Selznick in separate meetings warned me, it is the enemy of our industry. And if you go into it, you'll probably never get another script as long as you live. I responded, I've made a lot of money for you and a lot of money for myself in films. But I'm going into this business because I know that this is the next thing. It is the next thing. It's going to shake the world. I want to do this because I want to get one good idea into the mainstream of life once a week. I could never do that in movies. I will on television. Later in life, Loretta acknowledged the debt she owed to the studio system and the men who ran it. She reflected, I wasn't that flamboyant of a personality. I had to have a studio behind me and just wean me onto the public. If I had been bad, I would not have lasted. That's true. But if you're just good enough, that you can get better with practice, and that's what happened to me. And after so many years, the soil was prepared. I didn't have to sell myself. Both the audiences and the producers knew what they were getting with the Loretta Young Show. But before going into television, Loretta would make 2 more films. The first one was with Jeff Chandler, and there's a reason why their love scenes look so authentic. So see that